We'll let folks in as they join, but we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to the July 2021 roundtable for the ACUHO-I Business Operations Series. The theme today is financial planning and budget strategies. You can see the little blurb on the screen. I'll go ahead and pass that on. It was also in the invite. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel today, as well as myself, and then we'll go ahead and get started shortly. So really quick, my name is Dwayne Lindsay. I'm at University of California, Davis. I'm the Executive Project Analyst in Student Housing and Dining Services. And I also serve on the Business Operations Planning Committee. Our panel today is, and again, they'll introduce themselves when we start the preset panel questions shortly, but I'll go ahead and just introduce them by their name and title. So Ramona Hernandez from University of California, Davis, Director of Business and Financial Services. David Berland, who's currently the Business Manager for Transportation Services at University of Wisconsin, previously had a few roles in student affairs and student housing at Northern Kentucky University. And then Kay Cisco, Budget Director for University Housing at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Really quick few our general ACUHO-I slides to stay connected and get involved with ACUHO-I. We will also be sharing this slide deck with the attendees post-session. So don't feel like you have to save or screenshot this. You we'll again share it via email. So this slide just shows some online resources from the association. Later on, we'll also share a slide about upcoming virtual roundtables and connections from ACUHO-I. Really quick, a few notes about today's session. The session is being recorded. You probably saw that when you joined, and it's also in the top left. We really encourage you to use chat to introduce yourself or introduce yourself, state your name, position, and institution. Continue to use chat throughout the roundtable to join the conversation and ask questions for our panelists. Again, join the conversation, so encouraging you all to connect with one another, and feel free to also respond to the question. So if we ask a question to the panelists, or one of you ask a question, you also are more than welcome and actually encouraged to respond from your campus experience. If able, if you do choose to engage during the session out loud, we ask you to have your webcam on, and of course unmute yourself when you're sharing, but if not, then mute yourself. And then again, if you do choose to engage, we ask you just to remind us who you are and your institution, just so we just know where you're coming from. Really quick again, just so you can see them before you actually see them actually speak to you. Our panel today, Ramona, David, and Kay. So we just want to thank them for their time today to share their experience and speak to us. And we're going to go ahead and turn it over. So I'm going to stop sharing screen, and then I will start our questions. Give me one moment. Okay. So, and when I ask the question, I'm also going to put it in the chat so you all can see it. So question one, please introduce yourself, your position oversight, and your institution, and define your organizational and financial structure, i.e. Who does your budget report up to? Ramona, do you want to go ahead and start us off?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Ramona Hernandez, serve as the Director for Business and Financial Services, University of California, Davis. Student Housing and Dining Services, we're a full shop. We have self-operating dining under our oversight, Office of Student Development, which includes our Res Ed or Res Life folks. We have our own marketing, have, of course, the business ops, residential hospitality services where our contracting occurs. And we've even got a Office of Inclusion and Organizational Excellence. So with that said, Dwayne, let me make sure I'm not missing the questions. Let's see. My oversight, we are self-op auxiliary, so we have oversight of that entire budget. We report it through student affairs, but do work closely with what we call finance, operations, and administration, which is where the budget office sits. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Kay, do you want to go ahead and we'll go in that order, Ramona, Kay, David, and then of course you all can flow however naturally it flows. Oh, sorry, Kay, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon. I'm Kay Cisco. I'm Budget Director for Housing at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Under me, all things financial and HR. We report up through student life. We are an auxiliary. So I think that's pretty much it for us.
And I'm David Berland. So I most recently served as the Director of University Housing at Northern Kentucky University for 3 years. I'm going to speak in the present tense when I talk about my time there and budgets with housing. So just in case that confuses anybody, my current role is with Transportation Services at the University of Wisconsin. I'm in charge of the finance unit for that department. So I think the organizational and financial structure, housing is supposed to be a fully self-sufficient auxiliary, but at NKU it was a little bit ill-defined, particularly after COVID, because now it is a university-supported auxiliary because of the budget concerns brought on by COVID. So it is partially subsidized now by institutional funding, but it is set up and run as a self-supporting auxiliary, which reports up to the Vice President of Student Affairs. It only includes housing, which is housing operations and residence life. And then there's a service level contract with operations and maintenance for facilities, but dining is run third party at NKU.
Great, thank you all. So I'm going to go ahead and move into question 2. I mentioned this to the panelists, it's very general, so we're going to see how they want to take it. Put it in the chat. Please discuss your budget processes, and how it works at your campus.
Well, I would say, just generally speaking, at UC Davis, for our department, we start our budget in the fall. We have a 10-year business plan that really guides where we are going, and it's an interactive between the current budget and then the long-term guide. We then we have an assistant director of financial analysis and planning who leads the effort with our account managers and our directors. We have 6 directors that sits underneath an AVC for our unit. I'll tell you briefly, kind of jumping ahead, what we used to do, what we did differently this year because of COVID, and we will continue to do, is we used to work directly with those account managers. What was your budget? What do you see changing? Gathering that information and building the budget from the bottom up. This past year, because we had such a, we turned upside down because of COVID and all the cancellations we had, we started with the directors and said, here's your target. And here's your target cuts, and work with your team to look at where you can make those cuts. And then we came back and we made that budget. So essentially back and forth, we use adaptive. We have it's KFS right now. ACUHO-I, any of you, it's an older system, I think, out of Rice University. And we then use this software called Adaptive to really just help us manage the budget, and then basically drop things in Excel, sending sheets back and forth, gathering that information, rolling it up, going back against that business plan. What is our target to finalize? Where does our rates need to be? What are we looking in terms of big objectives, issues that we're trying to address, and as well as looking at occupancy and what we think our income will look like. So generally speaking, that's how we do it, and that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Okay, here at the University of Tennessee, basically I have my budget set up in an Excel workbook, and it's probably somewhere close to 90 sheets that are in there. And David, it's similar to what you have shown at previous BizOps. So I was glad to see you and I kind of think alike. But it's set up, we have multiple cost centers and revenue centers. We operate our halls separately. They should stand alone. So there is quite a bit that goes into budgeting for that, because while we're looking at everything as a whole, everything still has to be kept separately by cost center. Pretty much in the fall, usually late fall, I will send out to our executive director and our associate directors. I will send out spreadsheets for them to complete to get me the information based on what their areas are going to be doing. And the other areas are administrative services, Res Life, and facilities that handles our maintenance and custodial, et cetera. They send those back to me. I get all of that plugged in, and then the senior leadership team as a group will sit down and go through the budget and, talk about, is this a good number? What's going on that, we haven't thought about, to try to incorporate as much as we can into that. And I'm sure that a lot of you have the same issues where you have changes in campus policy, changes in laws that can cause issues. Forget about COVID. It's like a never ending battle to try to figure out what's changing and what's not changing. Sometimes we don't get information until after the budget has been entered in the university's accounting system. So it's kind of like a never ending battle to try to figure out, what's going on. I've always said that a budget is pretty much your best guess at the moment. And that's really what it is, because I can enter the budget and it'll close out and everything will totally change. So I'm sure a lot of you have experienced that also. So, David?
Well, that was a great introduction to my process, Kay. Thanks. Like Kay, we split our budget, not necessarily by building, but by really by construction. So if two buildings were built together, then we keep them in the same cost center. And the reason for that is GAAP, generally accepted accounting procedures. And that's because we want to match the revenues for those buildings with the operational expenses as well as the debt expenses. And so it's interesting from a regional comprehensive perspective, which NKU is. It's not a flagship institution, it's more of a regional institution. There's a lot of constraints, and politics plays as big a role in developing the budget as do the numbers themselves. Thinking about COVID, for instance, there was a decision, a desire by the senior leadership team for the institution that we would have, at least 1,000 beds online. For context, NKU is just a little bit over 2,000 beds. Following some of the advice from ACUHO-I and from ACHA, we were going to originally open about 800 beds, but from a political standpoint, opening 1,000 or more beds was a better number. And so, budgeting is affected by those political decisions that come up as well. In addition, with a leverage percentage, meaning the amount of debt we pay based on our gross revenue each year, we're leveraged at about 55%. So it constrains what we can do with our budget. We were not filling up. We were at about 80% occupancy, and we knew that. And so for our budget, I would look at a demand analysis based on enrollment trends starting in November. As soon as we knew kind of what the enrollment trends were doing for the following fall, we would follow those, and we knew about how many freshmen we would capture each year. We knew approximately our returning percentage that we could capture. And that helped us to build out a revenue base that we could then build our expense budget off of. When you know what your debt service is going to be the following year, and you have a good idea of your revenues, you know what's left over. And that's where you can start to build out, what are you going to pay for personnel? How much are you going to allocate for building upkeep, preventative maintenance? And so really it was an iterative process that we utilized the university budget office. And we go back and forth. It was a shared spreadsheet, think like OneDrive or something where multiple people could use it at the same time. And we went back and forth with, okay, if we escalate salaries, what does that do to the bottom line? Look at benefits changes, because benefits change year to year. Kay was just talking about, you can enter stuff in now, and then the insurance company might come back and be like, nope, your premiums are going up. And you're like, well, I didn't budget for that. So there's going to be a deficit right there in the budget. But again, in the end, I think, Kate, you really said it best. It's your best guess at that moment, and you don't know what's going to change. So there's just wildly different components that go into it, and things that you wouldn't expect to play a part in the budget process, like politics, like the consumer price index. Those all have a very substantial effect on how you plan for what your expenses are going to be and how you're going to match that with your anticipated revenue.
Great, thank you all. So again, quick reminder, feel free if you all have any specific questions to enter them into the chat, or you can raise your hand and you're more than welcome to unmute and answer it directly or ask it directly. I'm going to go ahead and put the third question in the chat. For our panelists, some of you you've kind of spoken to this, so feel free to share more if you would like, or pass over. Don't feel like you have to repeat or provide a lot of response. Anywho, so question 3: has the pandemic changed your approach to your budget, and if so, in what ways?
Well, and I appreciate Kay and David sharing that they both have cost-based centers, with their budgets. UC Davis does not. A business decision was made many years ago to basically subsidize. I'm going to use the word is escaping my mind, but basically it's across the whole thing. So we have the same rates regardless if the building is older or newer. And we don't get into that level of detail in terms of our residence halls. I will say with our dining operations, we do have cost centers. It's very much cost driven as anyone who's managed dining or food. So in that area, we do that. What has the pandemic changed? I think the bottom line for us is, I'll say that in November of last year, we, after the cancellations we had in the spring of 20, and then we were at 25% occupancy of planned occupancy in the fall for our residence halls. And then we've got an unusual P3 contract, which is owned and operated by someone else, but then they contract with us. Well, I should say it's unusual for UC Davis. I know a lot of other institutions do this, where then they contract with our department to do the licensing and the marketing and Res Life. But that project was probably at almost 50%. Yeah, about 50% occupancy, a little bit better. But anyway, in terms of our residence hall budget, we were in the hole 54 million in November, whereas I'd say the year prior we didn't have big reserves for some different reasons I won't go into. But we did have reserves, and we were going to be in the black and in the future. So that was obviously not the case. The University of California decided to take out debt in the summer of 20, knowing that all the housing programs had taken a big hit, as well as some other income generating areas of the University of California system. So we got a $54 million loan. It's a 20-year payback at 2% interest. And we are projecting, we have it in our business plan to extend it out for 20 years, but we're in a deficit for at least another 5 years. So I think in terms of how that's changed our approach to budgeting is that we don't want it really is hamstringing us, in terms of what can we do in the future and just everything. So I would say that has been the major change, is to have a deficit, which we have not had ever. We are hopeful. We did a little better than anticipated in this fiscal year that just closed. We planned extremely conservatively for fall, and we now, at least in California, because the University of California system is requiring vaccination for students and staff, which allows us to plan for triples, and that's what we anticipate to have. Our income stream should be much stronger. And it will help us reduce that planned deficit. But it's all about the bottom line. Campus has told us if we have future deficits, they will basically cover us at their lost interest. So So if they're anticipating a 3% interest on the pool of cash that they have, they're going to charge us that amount just to keep us, cover our cash flow. We don't want that. We also don't want to raise rates. We also don't want to lay people off. That's the other thing the University of California system has done, which I think is fantastic, that we did not lay folks off unless we absolutely couldn't find another job for them. And essentially there was maybe 10 people out of potentially 150 that we laid off this last year. So all great things, we're going to come back full steam, but I think in terms of that budget, it is really, whereas I think, and I'm imagining the other programs are, what is the best thing for our students, and kind of balancing that with what is the cost. It's really, what is it going to cost us, and what are the things that we can adjust to try to find that balancing point and get back into the black.
Okay. We also had a deficit last year. We're looking better this year, even though we did not have a good year occupancy wise. I think we're going to finish in the black. I got my fingers crossed. The preliminary we are, but I don't know what else is going to hit between now and the middle of August, when the university gets through charging us for everything they want to charge us for. We are on our third year of no rate increase. Actually, last year, while we had the same base rate, we reduced rates because of reduced time on campus. So we had one rate for fall and another rate for spring. I believe we were short 2 weeks in fall and 1 week in spring. So it was like a 10% discount in fall and 5% in spring. So that was totally different for us. And not something we had budgeted for originally. Fortunately, in October, we can do a revised budget. We cannot change our bottom line, but we can move money around to wherever we need to move it around based on what's happening. So we were able to adjust our budget a little bit. One thing that we are seeing is the institution is starting to dictate more of what we do and what we're going to spend money on, which is new to us. So we're losing some of our autonomy. I'm hoping that is temporary. And another thing that we're seeing is ambiguity in forecasting, because we can't, we're having trouble getting good numbers. Admissions and Joel, you may want to jump in here. Are they still admitting students at this point in time?
Yes,
Okay.
they are.
So we're kind of like, we don't have a clue where we're going to end. We have actually had to create spaces on campus because we've got more people coming in than we have beds. So we're in the process of working on all of that. So that, while not really pandemic related, may be a result of the pandemic, because we do know we had some students last year who said they were going to take a gap year. And I think we're reaping the benefits of that this year. Our occupancy last year, I believe, was somewhere between 77, 78%. And we normally run about 94. So I think we may be starting to see some of the students that didn't come last year are coming this year. So we have more first time in college coming in. And I think that's about all I have on that. I've got some other things if we get to other questions that we'll talk about, but I don't want to run over on some of these and repeat myself later. So David.
So I think there's been two very direct impacts, and it's interesting because, Kay and Ramona are at pretty large institutions for housing departments, but NKU has a substantially smaller department, and being a regional comprehensive, we're having the opposite problem. Numbers are way down. The pandemic has caused people to rethink if they want to go to college and where. And what we're finding at regional comprehensives is either people are now shooting for the stars, if you will. They're going to more private schools, they're going to flagship institutions, or they're choosing to back down to two-year institutions. And so numbers have fallen off a cliff, which was predicted somewhat. There was an enrollment cliff coming, particularly in the Midwest in the next 2 years. But the pandemic has expedited those numbers. And so right now, at last glance, NKU was looking at achieving maybe a 60 to 65% occupancy as a best outlook for this coming year, whereas we were normally getting 80%. And so it's going to take us longer to recover from the pandemic, because without the continued stream of advertising and students coming in and telling people from their previous institutions where they were going, like their high schools, that recruitment has really suffered. And because our housing numbers are linearly correlated with admissions numbers, it has a direct effect on housing as well. The other thing that really changed with budgeting because of the pandemic was deferred maintenance. What our institution did to weather the pandemic, and they did a good job of it. We didn't have to have any layoffs. We had furloughs like many places did, but we managed to retain all of our people, but we lost some positions through attrition. But deferred maintenance was a significant issue. One of the first things we did is we cut all project budgets. And so if it was a project that wasn't a part of your scheduled maintenance, it didn't happen. Now, we also happen to be building a brand new residence hall that opens in the fall. And so combined with that, there are some facilities that are struggling pretty mightily, to the point that without that deferred maintenance, we actually had to shut down one of our residence halls for this next year in anticipation of our low occupancy, to catch up on some of that deferred maintenance before it becomes a real issue. And so those maintenance budgets are going to have to be very, very, very carefully monitored and allocated over the next couple of years. And while I was at NKU, I developed a long-term plan for looking at facilities and facilities management and deferred and reactive maintenance. But now that's going to have to be adjusted into a shorter time scale, because the work has to happen for the buildings to continue to be occupied. But the additional allocation of money is very difficult, particularly with the high leverage rate at NKU. So that changes the dynamic of the conversation when it comes to budgets.
Great, thank you all. So jumping in, and again, feel free if you all have any questions, enter them into the chat or ask out loud. So next question. What are some financial planning strategies you either had to choose to implement, to pivot? Sorry, let me reread my question because I skipped a line. What are some financial planning strategies you either had to do or you chose to implement to pivot during the pandemic? Whew, that was a tough one for me.
So at UC Davis, and I think I spoke a little bit about this, we've had a long history of, and I'll say it's reflective. I think the University of California is very decentralized and very much units everything kind of flows up to the top, because that's a value that we have in the housing and dining budget process worked that way. And I think the change we made last year was like, no, this is the target we have to cut. This is what you're getting. You have to hit that budget. And I know there's a lot of people out there who say that's how we always do budgeting. And that's not how we have done it in our department. So that is a change that I want to keep. I think that especially given our state of finances, that we need to really drill in. And I think that setting that base amount that they can increase or change really forces those direct unit directors and then their staff to look for the fat, because we all know people pad things, people like to have their little stashes here and there, and and we get it, and we all need that to a certain extent, but I really want to flesh it out because the bottom line still has to hit a certain target. So I'd say that's something that we will continue to do into the future. Okay.
Okay, just some of the things that we either had to do or we chose to do. One which was not our choice was shortly after we opened in the fall, we had to close down one of our buildings to convert it over to ACUHO housing. We had to relocate those students. It just so happened that the hall that was chosen was our lowest price point hall. So to, I don't know, compensate the students for their for being displaced, they were given a credit, and then they could choose any vacant bed on campus, and for the spring they got that at the rate of that low price point building. So that was one thing we did. We talked about earlier the reducing of the rates. We did not have a rate increase going into last year, and then we ended up with a 10% discount on fall and a 5% discount on spring. Something we did not have budgeted, we added contact tracers to our staff to help keep up with, everything that went along with someone with COVID or being exposed to COVID. We also, and this was not our choice, we had to go off campus and we rented some apartments, and we also rented rooms in hotels. As a matter of fact, for a short period of time, we rented out an entire hotel to use for ACUHO. And so on a positive note, since we've talked about all this on the downside, there were certain expenses that we were able to recoup from grants that the university received. So additional expenses for COVID, we were able to get that money back. And as a matter of fact, I'm still recouping money on that. We were able to not only get the money for the off-campus apartments and the hotels, but we were also able to get it for any supplies, anything we had to buy that was not a normal operating expense that was directly related to COVID. We have been able to recoup that money. And it was actually, I don't know the full amount. I know just in supplies, I was able to recoup several $100,000 of that money. So, and then they paid, I don't even know how much the off-campus apartments and the hotels were. The contact tracers, we ended up really not needing them much, so we used them for kind of special projects. Here at UT, no one was laid off, no one lost their job because of COVID. We found work. UT did this thing, and I don't know if this is like common practice or not, but if a department had a person that didn't have any work, but they didn't want to let that person go, they could continue to pay that person, and that person would work in another department on campus, or maybe multiple departments on campus. So we actually had a person here who did that, and we utilized her a lot because we pretty much switched from paper to electronic overnight. We were in the process of trying to get a lot of things electronic, but with COVID, when everybody started telecommuting, all of a sudden, documents had to pass electronically as opposed to handing off paper because nobody was together. So, and actually, when you think about how much paper we used, I have no idea, how much savings that is, but I do know that space-wise, it's a huge savings. We have a lot of empty file cabinets right now because we don't have any paper to go in them. So to me, that's a good thing. I don't like paper. I like the electronic much better. So David.
That was a great answer. I think one of the biggest things that we did, and this was partially mandated by the institution, was we scrutinized every single penny of discretionary spending. There was not a single penny that was allowed to be spent under $500 that didn't have to be approved by a director, and anything over $500 required from, I think, like 500 to 5,000 had to be approved by an assistant vice president, and anything above 5,000 had to go to the cabinet. Period. There was nothing could be spent otherwise. And so, Kay, you mentioned it. We didn't realize how many office supplies we were using, but when we consolidated and we found out how people were squirreling stuff away, we saw some significant savings. We cut discretionary expenses by 13 to 15% across the board just by scrutinizing expenses and looking at what we were buying and why we were buying it. One of the big things that the pandemic brought into focus that will substantially affect future planning was the disparity between our low-income students and our traditional students. We really found that the pandemic exacerbated a lot of those financial issues. And something that we introduced during the pandemic was kind of a no-frills housing and dining experience where we cut the rate by, I'd say somewhere between 30 to 35% for both housing and dining. And there is now an expectation on our campus that discount housing will be available and will be married to a no-frills meal plan as well. So in partnership with our third-party dining service, I found a way to introduce a less expensive housing plan. And what we decided to do, originally we just had less expensive rooms and they were placed in buildings that didn't sell each year. So we were trying to sell additional spots. It was a traditional marketing ploy to try and get people to buy into our buildings with lower occupancy. But that created a system of haves and have-nots. If you could afford to not live there, you didn't have to live there. But if you couldn't afford to live anywhere else, now you were basically going somewhere that no one else wanted to be. So to strip out some of that have and have-not dynamic, we actually created a scholarship program where we're going to give, I think next year it's going to be 50 students will get flat rate $2,000 a semester for housing, no matter where they live, based on an application for financial need that they submit to a committee that's comprised of financial aid, student accounts, housing, dining, and the Vice President's Student Affairs Office. And those scholarships will essentially be matched with the No Frills Dining Plan, which is about 20 or so % off of the traditional price. And the reason we're doing it that way as a scholarship is that this allows students to choose any room in housing and pay that flat rate. And we've budgeted for that loss based on our highest rate across the board. So, we budgeted for a loss of 50 people paying, upwards of 50% off of their rate. I think the average is like 33%. And the plan is to expand that program in the future, I think to 100 to 150 students, which allows us to, offer discounted housing for students to live anywhere on campus. But of course, the financial impact of that plan has to be accounted for in future years. So now we have to look at, basically we're reducing our revenue. We're saying our top line revenue is no longer accurate. We're going to just take a slice off the top. In the end, that comes to like 2, maybe 2.5%. It's not that significant, but we're starting with a new baseline now. So we have to figure out, where do those cuts come from in the first year? How do we continue to build that program and marry it with reduced expenses so that we can balance the budget, try and end in the black? And, Ramona mentioned that it's complicated. You took the $54 million and you're going to run in the red for a number of years. NKU is in the same situation. They're over leveraged right now. And so there's a planned deficit over the next 7 to 10 years. They won't come out of that deficit until 2029. And that was planned so that they could build a new building and do renovations on the building. And the university is supporting that deficit on an annual basis, but still encouraging housing and other auxiliary departments to cut those losses, operate as close to the black as possible, understanding that we're probably going to run in the red. Last year, for instance, despite our many cuts, we still ran probably about $1.5 million in the red, which had to be subsidized. Now, fortunately, there was the CARES Acts 1, 2, and 3, I think, that got us money. And so they subsidize using that, but they're very heavily leaning on housing to cut extraneous expenses so that those deficits aren't significant to the university, because that's got to come from somewhere. And the university doesn't necessarily have that money either. So it's looking at how do we balance access with the affordability piece, because if you lower the cost over here, inevitably that leads to an increased cost over here, even if it's outside the housing department. So you've got to really pay attention to minimizing those losses so as not to raise prices somewhere else, because now there's this interrelated relationship between the university and housing.
Great, thank you all. Panelists, just a quick note, I'm going to skip on your end question 5 because it's somewhat similar and it kind of ties into number 6, which is now 5. But anywho, so next question I'll put in the chat is, what is one nugget of wisdom regarding this topic that you would like to share with us? And is there anything, other strategies that you also want to share?
Negative wisdom. I think the one thing COVID has taught us, the pandemic, whether it's our budget or our personal lives, is, there's things that we thought, okay, this is how it has to be. And that all got thrown out the window and we survived. And I think we'll continue to survive and thrive. I know we are internally, we just had a meeting with our leadership team early today. ACUHO-I put out an article, and I'd be happy to have Dwayne share that with everyone about really I think the essence of it was, can we take this opportunity to look at what we've been doing and what we can change? Because we were overworked before COVID happened, and we'll continue to be overworked, have been overworked with COVID. And is there, what are we doing and why? And I think from a budget standpoint, that always goes back to, I think, a really key, part of budgeting is, what is the mission, vision, goals, and do these business decisions align with that, and in turns how we are either generating income or expending that income. Are there things that we've been doing for 20 years because that's how we've always done it, or that's because that's how Ramona always did it, and everyone's afraid to tell her we can't do that anymore, or ask the question, why are we doing this? And then also, again, just kind of looking at priorities, and is ultimately, if it's to serve our students and support the university's mission, are all those things that we're trying to do, how do they align to meet that? And then look at that. And I think from a budget standpoint, and in terms of then where do the priorities go, and how do we, especially if money is really tight and restricted, kind of using that exercise to then also look to us to cut that budget. So I'd say that is kind of the tidbit I want to share with you all. And then it's it's just, I think the pandemic has just made us all kind of stop and revisit a lot of different things. So I think that's what we can bring back to these jobs, our positions in the budget.
For me, the one thing that I thought of, which turned out to be very positive for us, is to always be prepared and always think ahead. One of the first things I did when I heard that we were going to be closing because of COVID was, and I don't know how everybody else works, we have a thing in our system called an internal order. We set one up for COVID expenses, and everything that was related to COVID, we charged against this IO so we could keep up with how much we spent. When I was talking about we were able to recoup from CARES, and David, yes, currently we're on our 3rd one. I was able to recoup several hundreds of thousands of dollars simply because I had good record keeping. And I know this is a federal grant, and I used to work on soft money, so I know what they're going to be looking for when they come into audit. And at the time I set this up, I was not aware that there was going to be money. This was just so we would know at the end of the year, this is what COVID cost us, what we had to pay, because, we had to I mean, it was unbelievable, you know, what they were going out and having to buy. I mean, we always have hand sanitizer, but now we're buying it in gallon jugs instead of the, you know, the ones that sit on the desk, things like that. So, you know, be prepared and think ahead. Don't let the immediate emergency keep you from seeing what you need to do. You know, just kind of take a step back and say, okay, what could possibly come of this? And, you know, make sure your record keeping is in good order. As a matter of fact, we're still recouping money. We're going back through everything from whatever day that first CARES grant started, which I want to say is somewhere around March 15th of 2020. And we are looking at everything again to make sure, you know, was there anything that we missed? Because the money is there, and, you know, we want to get everything we can to help offset our additional expenses. So, you know, my big thing is just be prepared and think ahead. David?
I think, Ramona, you may have said this a little bit earlier. No, in fact, I know you did. My biggest takeaway is don't think you know how it's going to work. There are things that we thought there's no way that you can do this any different. We were wrong. You know, I think about the new construction, and, you know, every single change order, of course, has to be signed by 1 million people. Campus mail, you don't have to have campus mail. You can use Adobe Sign, you can use DocuSign. There's a different way, and don't get stuck just because you've done it one way and doing it that way for the future. You know, I had long conversations with the university budget office about rethinking some of the allocations that they insisted couldn't be changed each year in our budgets. And I said, well, why? You know, you put in these contingencies that hold money from the budget, but you haven't spent them for 10 years. Why do you put them in there? Well, because we always have. That's not good enough. If the pandemic has shown us anything, just because we've always done it this way is not a phrase you should use in budgeting, in finance, in housing, even anymore. Just really be prepared to adapt and know that, think outside the box, because we made it work during a pandemic. We can do anything. There's nothing that we really can't do anymore. And so that's kind of my biggest takeaway. And I know that's a bit esoteric. It's not, you know, direct budget, but I think it ties into the budgets really well. These budgets have been done one way. It doesn't mean they have to continue being done that way. So that's my big takeaway from COVID.
Great. So looking at the clock, we're at 10 minutes remaining, or give or take 5 minutes, so folks can have some time back before the 1 o'clock or the whatever time is coming up for you all in your time zone. So any questions from the audience? You can ask in chat or out loud. Why we monitor chat, and again, if you feel free to unmute yourself. Panelists, again, you're more than welcome to also share any additional thoughts, but if not, definitely want to thank Ramona, Kay, and David for their time, their experience, their knowledge, their tips. Feel free to use the reactions in Zoom to make it more, to give some clap, or now you have obviously an array of emojis that you can share, hopefully positive, not any negative emojis. Actually, really quick, we did get a question in the chat. Have you helped your teams understand all of the changes that have occurred? Training, transparency. So Ramona, if you have any thoughts, just go down the line and feel free. If you all want to pass, you can pass.
You know, I think we've done a really good job of communicating. We do that by email. Our ABC has, until very recently, provided a weekly email. We also had our chancellor was providing a weekly email to staff. And so I think they were really sharing a lot of things. And then I think kind of drilling down into the budget. I also have HR under my area as well, just having open conversations and asking questions, sharing what I know, and just keeping that lines of communication open. So I think it's been working pretty well for us.
Our executive director did a very good job of bringing people together. We have senior leadership, which is all of the associate directors. And then we have a central staff, which is the associate directors and assistant directors. And we were actually meeting, as a central staff, we normally meet every other week. We were actually meeting weekly to keep everybody updated on everything COVID, what was going on campus. We were telecommuting for months. Even once students came back to campus, we still didn't, we did not have full staff on campus. So I think we did a very good job of keeping everybody up to date on everything that was going on, everything the university was asking or telling, whichever the case was. And that, trickled down through the supervision lines, and people were pretty well informed of what was going on. We continued, surprisingly, to lose people even during COVID, especially on our custodial staff, and we have not recovered from that yet. And I'm not even sure right now how many positions we're down, but when I did the budget entry, when I pulled the payroll information down, we had less than half of our custodial positions filled at that point in time. So I've actually been really surprised that people chose to leave during the pandemic. They are still leaving. I don't know if it was because of the pandemic or other reasons. We recently, I believe it was in May, the chancellor raised our campus minimum wage to $13 an hour, and we still have people leaving. So, I don't know how much of that has to do with the pandemic versus maybe other things. Oh, the Great Resignation. Okay. Yeah. So are other institutions experiencing that where you're having staff leave?
We actually did experience that, Kay. At NKU, we actually took it as an opportunity to consolidate some costs and outsource our custodial. Since we weren't going to be shifting anyone out of a position, we actually found positions on campus for all the custodial staff and housing and fully outsourced, which ended up saving us a couple $100,000 a year, just because pension costs are so high in the state or in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So yes, absolutely.
Raven, did you have another question you wanted to follow up?
Just to respond to David, to Kay's question too, we've had people use the pandemic as their nudge, I suppose. So not necessarily like they left because of the pandemic, but they felt like the pandemic was a good time to be like, okay, now I need to transition or just realign some things with their lives, be closer to family. We noticed that a lot, folks wanting to be closer to family. So more good decisions, I think, came from it. And then it also opened new doors for, new ideas and whatnot. So I look at it as a positive, but I think my question was just coming from I don't know, it talks about the money. And so as things were getting explained to us, they tried a very universal, large central approach to everything. But I think it could have been helpful to have things broken down by department about what was happening and making it make sense to everyone. But I still think they did their best in trying to get as much information out as possible because we were an institution who also furloughed. So there was a lot happening all at once.
Yeah, just quickly, and I know we're at the end of time. Yeah, I've heard that term a couple times now, the Great Resignation. But yeah, if you're interested in that, I would Google. There's some articles recently. But yeah, I think as with everything else, COVID has made some folks say, "Hey, do I want to do this anymore? Do I want to pursue something else? Do I want to work so many crazy hours? Do I want to do that drive I'm not looking forward to returning to my 3-hour round trip commutes, but that was a choice that I made, and I'll be starting it in the fall. Examples like that.
Yeah, thank you all again. Again, looking at time, I know earlier I mentioned I was going to share my screen again. As I mentioned, so we're going to pass on that, but as I mentioned, I'm going to share the PowerPoint in the follow-up email that we send. We're also going to include some additional information regarding the conference in the fall, and also our call for programs. We still are looking for programs for the fall conference, so we'll include that information in the email in the case you want to encourage, in case you all have any ideas that you may want to present or share about. We also are looking at programs a little differently. So in the case you want to maybe have a roundtable to have a community discussion, don't feel like a call for program means you have to put together a PowerPoint or anything. We're definitely open to other ideas as well. So I'll include that information in the email. But again, I wanted to thank David, Kay, and Ramona for their time. If you have any specific follow-up questions, we also will share the panelists' contact information in that email. So you're more than welcome to connect with them one-to-one, even if you just want to say thank you or pick up on an idea that they may have shared. And lastly, I had a thought, and I think it escaped me. We do not have an August roundtable. We take a break every August, but we'll revisit in September with a taste of the Business Ops Conference. So we'll include that, save the date in the email. But just about to be the new hour. Just again, thank you, Kay, Ramona, and David for your time. And thank you all for attending. So I'm going to close out today and just, again, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.